We hope you enjoy this podcast. All our conversations are inspired by films we have selected to appear on SDG.vision. So go and take a look and be inspired by people and organisations who are making valuable contributions to the Sustainable Development Goals and making our world a better place for everybody to live. Now, sit back, enjoy, be inspired, and afterwards, go and take action.
Mandeep Tiwana, Secretary General of CIVICUS, the World Alliance for Citizen Participation. Welcome to SDG Vision.
Thank you, Pierre. It's my pleasure to be here.
That's lovely. And we're really appreciative because I believe at the moment you're in New York.
Yes, that's correct.
And it's not early in the morning, but I can imagine in terms of a working day to do a podcast for first thing in the working day is not the greatest of starts. So we're really appreciative that you could find the time.
No, thank you. This is a subject that's very close to my heart, the Sustainable Development Goals. So I'm very pleased to be here.
That's lovely. That's terrific. And we'll talk about the Sustainable Development Goals in relation to the work of Civicus. Now, I hope that in New York at the moment, you haven't got the National Guards and the Marines parading around the streets. I hope all is quiet in New York. You never know. And that's a relevant issue that we'll probably touch upon, not directly perhaps, but in terms of civic freedom and the ability for people to make their interests and their expressions known in public. Now, I believe that you've been with Civicus for a number of years now. Is that right?
Yes, I joined Civicus in 2008 at its Johannesburg headquarters, and it was a very interesting time in 2008 because people were just starting to become aware of threats to civic freedoms. There was a spate of new laws that prevented civil society organizations from getting funding to support development. There was also rise of authoritarianism. People were starting to become more aware of that, and also moves to de-link democracy from human rights. So it was a period when the world, in a way, seemed in flux. But if we look back from 2025 now back to 2008, I think the world seemed to be a much more calmer place. There seemed to be more respect for international norms and standards, and we felt much more hopeful at that point of time.
That's sad to hear, but I concur. I think things are a little bit more pressing in terms of civic freedom these days. I asked about you being with Civicus for a while, working with them for a while, because I think there's no one probably better placed than you to tell us about Civicus's origins and what it does today.
So Civicus was an idea that was put forward by a group of civil society activists from around the world in 1991, just after the fall of the Cold War. It was a time that was very hopeful when people felt that democracy and civil society would flourish. And it culminated in a 2-year process in 1993 with the formation of the alliance. And importantly, it was also, it was an opening of the world because the Soviet Empire had that time, disintegrated. And the first Secretary General of Civicus actually came from Hungary, from Miklos Marshall, his name is Miklos Marshall. And it was an important moment for the founders of Civicus to have someone from behind the Iron Curtain to support civil society around the world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what it does today, is it similar to what it did then, or have things changed much?
So Civicus's mission is to strengthen civil society and citizen action around the world. And vision is a worldwide community of engaged, empowered citizens confronting the challenges facing humanity. The earlier days of Civicus, a lot of our work was around convening, of bringing a wide array of civil society actors together. But over the last decade and a half or so, we've started to focus a lot more on civic space as a sign of the times, as we've seen the erosion of democratic values around the world. So we've become best known for our work on defending civic freedoms, advancing democratic values. And we do this through several approaches, from participatory research to policy analysis to strategic convenings, through solidarity advocacy, through coalition building, emergency resourcing, engagement with multilateral institutions. So that has become an important part of our focus, apart from the convening role that Civicus plays in bringing civil society actors around the world to come and learn from each other, to engage with each other, and also to express solidarity with each other when times are challenging.
Yeah. Now, for old development hacks, certainly like myself, I'm very familiar what civil society means and civic space means. Could you, for those who haven't really heard those terms before, could you perhaps say what constitutes civil society? What is it?
So the traditional definition of civil society is the arena outside the market, the state, and the family, where people come together to take action. I think the idea should be seen as a fluid concept, because the notion of civil society continues to evolve. And I would say we should also include social enterprises that may be operating in the market, but they serve a public good. I would even say academic institutions, given the fact that there are so many private universities around the world, but they support fundamental freedoms, they support fairer societies. In a sense, so I would try to have a more expansive definition of civil society beyond community-based organizations and NGOs and unions and think tanks and others, who are included in the traditional notion of civil society. But civil society is an expansive concept, but also importantly, actually, I forgot to mention individuals. People, active citizens, concerned citizens, people who are willing to stand up against injustice. So I would say they are also part of civil society. But at Civicus, we make an important distinction. We call our members and partners to sign a declaration to abide by the principles enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That is, they stand for equality, they stand for non-discrimination, they stand for justice, and they stand for freedom of communities, freedom of individuals.
Yeah, and how would you define civic space in relation to civil society?
So civic space, simply defined, it is the ability of people to come together, to take action, to organize, in order to shape the political and economic and social structures around them. It's about the agency of people to impact decisions that shape their lives.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But first of all, I just want to, because you mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, which is always refreshing for us to hear organisations talking about the Sustainable Development Goals. I know that you aligned probably with a lot of them, if not all of them, but SDG 16, which is peace, justice and strong institutions, is of real relevance to the work that you do, particularly around those issues of civic freedom. Can you tell us why? Is it useful for you to be able to refer to SDG 16 in your work?
Well, thank you for that question. So the Sustainable Development Goals, I oftentimes say, are arguably the greatest ever human endeavor to create peaceful, just, equal, and sustainable societies. They draw from the International Bill of Rights. They are, enshrined in international law. In fact, the Danish Institute of Human Rights has done a study where over 90% of the Sustainable Development Goals can be directly traced to the international human rights framework. And they go beyond that by talking about sustainable consumption and production, about protecting biodiversity and oceans, and so on. So I'm a great proponent of the Sustainable Development Goals. They were put together in a moment of great hope in 2015, in being universal, in being holistic, in being interdependent. And all world leaders signed on to them, at that time. So I would say it's a great achievement of civil society to have brought forth the Sustainable Development Goals. And we at Civicus fought really hard and strong when the Sustainable Development Goals were being put together, that we should not repeat the mistakes of the Millennium Development Goals, which were a set of, I would say, reductionist 8 goals that were put together by a group of technocrats who had a particular agenda. So we were very mindful that we didn't want to repeat that experience with the Millennium Development Goals, because some of the states that claim to have done very well on the Millennium Development Goals, like China and Rwanda and Ethiopia and Cambodia, did so at a great cost to their people, by denying them freedom, by making a compelling case that development is delinked from human rights, democratic rights. So we were very mindful and wanted of that, and wanted to push for a holistic understanding of the Sustainable Development Goals. So at that time we called it a goal that promotes participatory democracy, that promotes participatory governance, that would include guarantees for civil society enabling environment that had been put forth in various conversations on aid and development effectiveness, whether in Busan in South Korea, or whether in Accra in Ghana, or whether in Paris in France, where the international community had come together to talk about development. And SDG 16, I would say, is the heart and soul of the Sustainable Development Goals, because it includes commitments not just under the overall rubric of peace, justice, and strong institutions, but on participatory, inclusive, and representative decision making. That's really, really important. Because it gives people a say in the decisions that impact their lives. And then it talks about access to information and fundamental freedoms, which makes them actually prescient, especially in 2025, given that the Sustainable Development Goals were put together, some 10 years ago, when we are faced in a world of disinformation and false narratives, that it talks about access to information and fundamental freedoms, when we are facing the march of authoritarianism and populism so strongly in so many parts of the world today. So I would say SDG 16 really is the glue to that binds the Sustainable Development Goals together. It's the key to unlock the potential of the goals, because it allows people who are who are really who should be at the center of development. It actually brings them into Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals framework, and it recognizes and celebrates their rights, sorry.
Absolutely. I mean, it's really interesting you say that. I've not heard anybody make that point, but actually I think it's very, very true that that's the foundation upon which all the other goals can be realised. And it's that word participation and free participation, isn't it, that's really important. I would urge people, because of course we have the SDGs, and most people, you can't be blamed for thinking that's all they are, just a series of goals. But of course there's indicators and targets that are underneath that provide a whole different layers of meaning to each SDG. And I think we'll put a link or in the information below to how to access that information and understand perhaps a bit more deeply what the SDGs are.
Just on that note, I would say, while the goals and the targets are very strong, and the system hit back through the indicators. The indicators, I would say, are more bureaucratically designed, and they were put together with not as much consultation as was the case with the articulation of the goals. So the indicators don't reflect the ambition of the goals, unfortunately, and it's been a ongoing tussle with us in civil society actually to have better indicators for the sustainable development goals and to have indicators that are not based on governmental statistics, which in times of populism and authoritarianism can be easily fudged. So we have been actually calling for civil society-led indicators, academic institutions indicators to be included to actually gauge progress that's being made with regards to the Sustainable Development Goals and Goal 16 in particular.
I think that's a real valuable observation. And I think we might talk about that a little bit later on in terms of, well, what next after the SDGs and how the whole structure can be improved. We were talking, or you were talking about civic space and defined what civic space is. I think most people are aware that there are problems around civic space and it's getting smaller and smaller in certain countries in at certain times. And I wonder how you think that we can protect the right of people to speak out, organise and hold power to account in parts of the world where people's ability to do that is being restricted.
So civic space is definitely deeply stressed around the world, despite the fact that the three fundamental freedoms that we take to be essential to civic space, that is the fundamental freedom of peaceful assembly, the fundamental freedom of expression, and the fundamental freedom of association, they are included in the constitutions of almost every country. They are included in the International Bill of Rights, and every state has a duty to protect these fundamental freedoms. But unfortunately, these fundamental freedoms are being crushed by corrupt and authoritarian leaders and their political parties and their supporters in many parts of the world. And Civicus measures civic freedoms around the world through the Civicus Monitor, which is a participatory research collaboration with over 20 organizations working at the regional level around the world. And our latest findings reveal that 7 in 10 people live in places where these freedoms are severely repressed or non-existent. So where the mere fact of speaking truth to power or uncovering high-level corruption or serious human rights violations can land you into prison for a long period of time. It can get you physically attacked and even killed, and it can lead to stigmatization and all sorts of slurs being put on you as being an agent of foreign powers, being inimical to national security, or cultural values, and so on. So the civic space challenge is a huge challenge that we see, and many powerful states have very challenging civic space conditions, and even in democracies where we thought the argument for civic space had been won, we are seeing a regression. So which means that there's that there is a huge issue and that we have to take head on as civil society. Now, one of the and here I think narratives, the work on narratives is absolutely critical, because authoritarians and populists they rule through narratives in one sense. So they try to promote this narrative of culture and nationhood as being frozen in time, whereas culture and nationhood are not static concepts; they are continuously evolving concepts. In wherever we sit, if we look back, at 50, 100, 200, 300 years, these concepts have continued to evolve and change. But what they try to do is try to hark back to a perceived golden age as if it was frozen in time, and there was a particular set of people, and they live like that. Well, the history of human civilization shows that people have always moved. People have always interacted with each other. They've been syncretic, transitions happening in cultures all the time. So which continues to evolve. So we have to take challenge that notion, because civic space is often constricted by calls back to ethno-nationalism, to cultural values. It's accompanied by patriarchy, as if that culture and national security has to be safeguarded, which is used as a shield by corrupt people or power-hungry people. And these politicians have found a very clever way to do that. So I think, one, we have to challenge that narrative. Challenging that narrative is harder to do in a world where we find that oligarchs control and own vast swaths of the media and tech landscape. So they are actively pushing out disinformation. They are actively gaming people's opinions to suit their interests. So we need to do that very strongly. But the second thing I would just say is we need to focus on the power of public mobilization, peaceful protest. Peaceful protest is really, really critical. It's through peaceful mobilization that big changes have happened. Whether it's India's freedom struggle, which was a huge non-cooperation civil disobedience movement that didn't just lead to freedom for India from 190 years of colonial rule, or 100 years of colonial rule, depending on which part of the country was colonized first. But it actually led to the disintegration of the whole British Empire, which covered vast swaths of the world, and the decline of colonialism in Africa and Asia, in many, many parts of the world. Or whether you see that it was mobilizations by people in around the world that led to decolonization, the anti-apartheid struggle, the civil rights struggle was won through peaceful mobilization, through mass movements. The struggle, the call for women's right to vote and gender equality, again, was done through mass mobilization. And young people have really caught the imagination of the world and actually forced the policymakers to pay attention to the issue of searing climate change through mobilization. So many of us in civil society, and organized civil society in particular, have to rethink our notion of top-down change, where we believe that proximity to decision makers or norms established in multilateral institutions are going to trickle down to people and create better, more equal and fairer societies. That notion is unfortunately failing in the current atmosphere of authoritarianism, populism. So we actually have to go back to old school mobilization and seek bottom-up change, because lasting transformational change in societies comes from people's mobilizations. It comes from people's understanding and wish and calls. And that is going to help us go beyond this current phase where too many people around the world are being denied the agency to shape the decisions that impact their lives by selfish politicians and leaders.
Yeah, it seems that part of you talked about populism, which is happening in many countries around the world. They build upon, ethno-nationalism. And also they seem to point to institutions and say, well, these are corrupt institutions. They don't represent you, the people, and we're going to modify and change these institutions. And a lot of these institutions do need some form of adjustment and modification. But how do you think that people can learn to rebuild institutions in a meaningful way that can better represent the majority of people in an inclusive way that doesn't leave out minorities? How can we do that when people do feel there is an undeniable feeling of betrayal out there? And that's being misused by, as you say, the oligarch media, controlled media, etc. You've talked about demonstrations and mobilizing, and are there other ways that you can think about that? I mean, because we know that sometimes mass protests, demonstrations, again, the way they are portrayed by the media, whether it's the Occupy movement or the Stop Oil movement, can be portrayed in a way that's saying, well, these people are interfering with our daily lives. They're stopping ambulances getting to hospitals, then fire engines getting to fire to put out fires, etc. There are ways of manipulating the narrative, and that's what the populists are very good at, as you've alluded to, is creating an engaging narrative with people who are alienated. How can we, at a local level, start to build a new narrative and come together and rebuild our communities? Because surely a proper bottom-up approach is going to require activism at a local level, sometimes in very small ways that can actually build into more powerful ways of addressing inequality.
So I'm glad you brought up the issue of inequality, because we are living in times of searing inequality. You have, on one hand, you have wealthy people who have so much wealth that they can they can send rockets into space for entertainment. And you have over 750 million people, according to conservative estimates, who go to bed hungry every night or are suffering from chronic hunger. So in a world of plenty, where you have so much that we have people struggling with the basic necessities of life, it's a travesty. And a lot of these challenges actually come down to economics and the link between economic resources and political power. I would say there are two movements afoot. One is, of course, old school authoritarianism, where you have militaries who control the economic levers of power, or you have political leaders who have complete allegiance to the military, and then a small group of people, are able to benefit and have extravagant lifestyles while the rest of the population suffers. These are in countries like North Korea or Egypt or Saudi Arabia or maybe Nicaragua and Venezuela and so on. Then you have countries which are relatively open democracies, but because of the Washington Consensus and this notion of market fundamentalism, that the market will regulate itself, this compelling case that's been made through the neoliberal economic discourse over the last 25 years or so, since the 21st century has accelerated, where the state is actively retreating from the public sphere, and large portions of the public sphere are being hived off to private interests because of the collusion between political and economic discourse, where compelling cases were made in previous years that the public sector was inefficient and so on. And rather than fixing the public sector, the private sector took over public responsibilities, and states started to outsource basic services, which led to the consolidation of wealth by oligarchs in far too many democracies around the world. And those oligarchs then bankroll politicians, and who are then able to win an election in the ballot box, whether through manipulation or of the public discourse, or whether through bullying tactics, as happens in countries like Russia and Zimbabwe. So we have to really challenge this economic discourse, and the fact that where development is conflated with economic growth, and the Rwanda model of development, or the China model of development, or the Gulf model of development, where economic growth is considered to be above everything else, without understanding the cost of oppression that exists in societies, and when a large population is deprived of the benefits of the natural resources and that exist in a country. and where social capital is actively suppressed. So here we really need to understand what the state's responsibility is, and then come together where people can really say no. Actually, when there's inequality in societies, when the state does not provide its responsibilities to the people for which it collects direct and indirect taxes from the people, it doesn't provide basic health, basic education, safety and security to people, then something is wrong. And here, I say for individuals, yes, people are at different stages of mobilization, and they have different appetites for citizen action. But I can safely say that almost everyone on the planet has a desire to be treated fairly. They want a better life for their children. They want their basic necessities to be met. Whether with regards to their health, with regards to housing, with regards to education, and also with regards to having agency to reach their full potential. So people can come and be at different places, and that's what happened, in the struggle for gender equality or civil rights, where people were, some are out in the streets. Some might be talking to their neighbors and being in community meetings and standing up against what they see is an apparent injustice. Some could be writing to their legislators. Some could be, supporting progressive political parties. Some could be, writing to newspapers. Some could be active on social media. So all of that takes place. But we need to really challenge this notion of individualism versus collective good of the community. And the neoliberal economic discourse has pitted individualism and sort of pushed forward this model as if greed is good. And we need to challenge that very strongly. And I think, and I believe that younger people are actually in many ways much more attuned to it. They know that the planet is facing a lot of stress from climate change and from environmental degradation, and sustainable consumption and production is the way forward. So it all does come down a lot to that.
It's a very complicated issue, isn't it? But I think at the end of the day, it's actually a very simple issue, and it's about, in a way, consciousness, or the way that people see themselves in relation to society and to others. And I think you quite rightly identified the fact that our global consciousness as individuals and the way we look at the world and our relationship to it has been hijacked by the neoliberal agenda, which was privatize everything for profit, and that the real value in the world is about your own individual gain of wealth, and everyone else is going to try to get that from you. So you need to distrust everybody else, and you can't trust anyone but your immediate family, etc. And that erodes civil society, it erodes families, it erodes people's relationship to friends. And so it's a big project, isn't it? But I think, as you said, I think it's important for people to understand that a lot of it is about power and power over people, and what people have power over, and that analysis, as you say, that wealth, we have enough resources in this world for everybody to be able to eat and lead dignified and meaningful lives. But it's the way that wealth is distributed that is the key problem. And in a way, the populists do that in a very odd way, that they talk about it. They blame the immigrants. That's their solution. Get rid of the immigrants. Well, it's not the solution. The biggest enemy is actually the corporations and those in power who serve those corporations. Not every corporation, obviously, but there are notable cases where that corporations are not good for society and for the environment. And so it really, the battle is for hearts and minds, isn't it? As much as anything else. We come back to, we need to develop a new narrative that is as compelling, more compelling than the populists' narrative that seems to hold a lot of people spellbound at the moment.
I would say on that, we need to reinforce the notion of truth. Unfortunately, a lot of time the populists rely on very flimsy arguments that are devoid of truth, that are based on half-truths and sometimes even outright lies. And many of the populist leaders who speak harshly in terms of immigrants and minorities, their own ancestors may have usually come from somewhere else, because, as I mentioned, the history of human civilization is the history of migration. People have always moved and interacted with each other and intermarried and so on, and these notions of community and culture that we have today were developed only a few hundred years ago, or even less than that sometimes, or nationality. So I think that's one thing that we need to really focus on. And the second thing is, we really need to also look at the ways of living of communities that rely on natural resources. Indigenous people oftentimes have developed ways of living in syncretic harmony with nature. Unfortunately, they've been savaged by modern civilization.
No, absolutely. And I think also it was interesting when you mentioned that young people are more likely to get it, to understand. And I wonder what role you think in creating this new narrative and this new civic participation, what role can youth-led movements and young community activists play in creating a new way of being, a new society that is richer and more equitable for all?
I'd say young people have a lot of power, even though sometimes they feel disenfranchised, because their greatest power is their belief that all things are possible. That is immense power. They're oftentimes devoid of the cynicism that exists amongst older people who've come up against the system and might have gotten the wrong end of the stick. So the idealism of the youth can really overcome many of these things. And that's what young people can draw sustenance from, when they seek to advance, gender justice, economic equality, political participation, environmental sustainability, and they have done that. They've shown it. And they are also better at connecting, using the digital sphere to connect with causes and people beyond borders and across the world in sharing and appreciating our common humanity.
Are there any programs or activities that Civicus is engaged with in relation to young people at all?
So we have a youth action team, and we have a Civicus network called Civicus Youth. We also have at our International Civil Society Week, which is going to be held in Bangkok from 1st to 5th November this year. Prior to that, we've traditionally had a youth assembly where young people come and they speak about their ideas. But this year, we want to bring the ideas from the youth assembly, where young people can come and debate and engage and learn from each other, into the main assembly. So we need so that we can have intergenerational conversations and also push for an end to conflict, an end to environmental degradation, and better ways of and push for better ways of living, because young people actually have the greatest stake in the future. They have the longest lives to live. They're going to be the most impacted by climate change.
Absolutely. I think that's really important. Now, coming back to institutions, I note that Civicus works quite closely with the United Nations. And I wonder why you place importance. I think you're based in New York because of the UN headquarters, I presume, anyway. I know you've got Civicus has offices in other parts of the world. Why is this? Why such emphasis on partnership working, or perhaps it's an advocacy role you play with the UN?
Yes, indeed. I'm based in New York, and I moved here in 2017 to be Civicus's representative to the United Nations. And the reason we engage with the United Nations, which is facing its own set of challenges at the moment, is the fact that the United Nations was an exercise in radical optimism in 1945, built out of the ashes of the Second World War. It was an exercise in internationalism, in connecting people across borders. So in that sense, Civicus as a global alliance of civil society, of people engaged in confronting the challenges facing humanity, shares a common cause with the United Nations. The difference is that we seek to do it through people. We seek to do it in non-bureaucratic ways. We seek to transform institutions. We seek transformational change in our societies, whereas the United Nations has over the years, despite its radical revolutionary beginnings, the seeds of which were sown by the likes of Hansa Mehta and Eleanor Roosevelt, when they put together the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, has unfortunately become an excessively bureaucratic institution, and I think has been let down by its top leadership, who have sought incremental change. They've allowed themselves to be dictated by perceived political realities and personal ambition. So it's become an organization that is that has become dominated by states, whereas the preamble to the United Nations actually speaks in the name of we the people, and here we are pushing for change in the United Nations too, and we have come up with some with some roadblocks. So Civicus has put forward actually 3 ideas, working along with other civil society organizations, to radically transform and open up the United Nations. The first is a very low-hanging fruit, is the idea of a civil society envoy or a people's envoy who would clear up bottlenecks in civil society participation within the UN system, who would promote best practices on civil society and people's participation across the UN system, and ensure that the engagement with people and civil society across the UN system is consistent. It's not dependent on the head of an agency or the head of a country office or a regional office, or the organization's traditional engagement, or the government that primarily funds it. Unfortunately, we have not been able to advance the idea of a civil society envoy because the UN's leadership has not been open to this. Although they have appointed envoys to promote digital participation, they have talked about an envoy for future generations. There's a water envoy, a climate envoy, and so on. So we are continuing to push for an idea of a civil society envoy.
Can I just ask why, Mandeep, do you think that they have blocked this, or they hadn't taken this on?
It's a good question. Part of and here I can only conjecture. So part of it might be that it is not to offend powerful states that bankroll the United Nations and are opposed to civil society participation. They think there's already too much civil society participation in the United Nations, and there's too much talk about human rights at the United Nations, which doesn't serve their own interests. Part of it is by some in organizations and some networks seeing themselves as gatekeepers of civil society and people's participation, who want efforts to be channeled through them and have gotten the ear of powerful people within the system who could make this change. Part of it is just apathy. because not a strong enough demand is being made, or they don't believe in the notion of people's and civil society participation. We say is just an additional recognition of the role of civil society that would open up. So I think there are several forces at play, although we have been pushing very hard at Civicus through a campaign which we call the We the People's campaign, which has been done by two other organizations, Democracy Without Borders and Democracy International, but it's also supported by several organizations across the world, including large networks and so on. The second idea that we've been pushing forward to democratize the United Nations and to make it more amenable to public opinion is the idea of a UN Citizens Initiative, which would be both based on a European Citizens Initiative, where a critical mass of people, maybe could be 1 million, could be 5 million, send a petition to the UN General Assembly and the UN Security Council, urging it to take immediate action on an issue that might not have the attention of the General Assembly or the Council. It could be a forgotten conflict. It could be a social or a migration issue that crosses borders. It could be an issue that needs urgent attention, like challenging the economic discourse and even privatization attempts within the United Nations. And then that would oblige, these two institutions to take action.
And that's a participatory element, in terms of participatory democracy, isn't it?
Absolutely, and it's an easy idea. It doesn't, it's not that complicated. And then the third is an idea of a UN Parliamentary Assembly, which many people have talked about, which would ensure direct representation from people to at the United Nations. So people would directly elect their representatives, and you would have a Parliamentary Assembly to be a supportive body to the UN General Assembly. The UN General Assembly, unfortunately, is bureaucratically represented. So basically, diplomats who work at the behest of the executive of a country represent the interests of the people of that country. But we know that many countries actually don't even have substantive democracy. So basically, they basically represent the executive, and it leads to more red tape and I would say less imagination on transformational change.
Are these sort of campaigns, Mandeep, or are they sort of discussions that you have, programs that you have with the UN, or can people get, I don't know, is there a petition that people can get behind and support at all? Any of these three recommendations?
So these are part of a campaign called wethepeoples.org. So if you just go to wethepeoples.org, just all one word, you will see more. There's more information is required and is there. And so we have had so much resistance to these issues that now what we as Civicus are doing is actually pushing for the adoption of a civil society day. The UN has all sorts of days. There's days to commemorate yoga. There's day to for press freedom and journalism, which is good, which is important. But there's no day to actually celebrate the contributions of civil society. And I dare say the UN would be a much less hopeful place if civil society were not present there. So we are pushing for the adoption of a civil society day, which would be an occasion to recognize the contribution of civil society, recognizes the challenges of access and participation, and also the persecution of civil society for coming and speaking their truth at UN bodies, because the issue of reprisals remains a pressing one at the UN. And it would require UN General Assembly. So we're going to be working with several states that want the multilateral system to function, that want civil society at the table, to ensure that that the big states are not able to steamroll the interest of smaller states.
Absolutely. And I really urge people to go to that website and support your work, which I think is really valuable. Now, the SDGs, that we've talked about, they started in 2015, as you mentioned. They end in 2030. We're 5 years away. You mentioned the Millennium Development Goals and that, they're an improvement on that. But of course, as you mentioned with the indicators, etc., they're not perfect. As the world is, everything can be improved and things change in the world around us. So they need to be adjusted. But what do you hope will replace them? Or A, do you think anything will replace them? And B, what do you hope will replace them?
So I would just say, the first thing that we probably need to consider is the fact that the SDGs have not been implemented in their entirety, or even or I would rather say they've been implemented half-heartedly. So that is why progress, even on the indicators, is lagging. Every year, the UN Secretary General produces an SDG progress report, and which shows that there are severe gaps in the implementation of the SDGs. So it would be inopportune to put together a new framework when you have not achieved this current framework. I would rather say that the international community focus on extending the current framework and try to implement these current goals, which are holistic. They are goals that were actually ahead of their time, and refrain from the impulse to put together a new framework. But the United Nations loves to to put together, have a new summit. It loves to have a new document because it serves bureaucratic interests. It allows bureaucrats to show they have something to they have done an activity, but they don't follow up through impact. So I would say that is something that should be resisted. We should seek an extension of the Sustainable Development Goals because of their rights-based underpinnings, and in the current political climate of values-free transactional diplomacy, I dare say, if the powerful states that control the United Nations were to put together a new framework, they would tussle over it. They probably won't be able to agree on something, or maybe the powerful states that have been taken over by authoritarians and populists would agree on a reductionist framework that further strengthens the power of oligarchs and serves their own interests.
So that's what you fear might happen.
Yes, I fear that the commitments in the Sustainable Development Goals on peace, justice, and strong institutions, on the SDGs that we fought so long and hard for, might be undermined.
And of course, the 3 steps that you outlined that Civicus is petitioning with the UN in terms of changes, that could prevent that from happening, couldn't it? In terms of that participatory engagement with the UN, that usurping of that space, of the UN space, by corporations, interested parties, that risk could be minimized.
Yes, you're absolutely right. If we had a civil society envoy, we could ensure greater people's and civil society participation in UN decision making, and also greater follow through on the decisions that the UN makes. If we had a World Citizens Initiative, the aspirations of those and ideas of peoples who are not supported by powerful states could be brought to the United Nations. And of course, if we had a parliamentary assembly, it would ensure a direct channel for communities to express their concerns and bring their issues to the UN. Unfortunately, what's happened is the UN has gotten into this cycle of saying it's all about the member states, whereas they just need to read the UN Charter. The UN Charter is actually about we the peoples. It's not about peoples. It's about it's about peoples, not member states. But it's dominated now by member state aspirations and member state directives and diktats.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. Lastly, Mandeep, I know you're very busy. what one thing do you think that everyday citizens, listeners of this podcast, could do to advance peace, justice, strong institutions in their community? Do you think there's one practical thing that people can maybe sign your petition, maybe your campaign?
Yes, I think one is not to lose hope and to believe that a better world is possible. I think that's the most important thing. Then whether you have a conversation with your child, with your colleague, whether you're with your young relative or your old relative or your peer or your friend, or your community, with your representative, in your local club. That's really important, that we need to continue to talk to each other, continue to engage, and then look for ways to convert the talk into action and the action into follow-up.
I like that. That's a very, very good place to end, I think. Communicate and formulate action and ways forward. Yeah, I think that's lovely. And I really very appreciative for you taking the time to talk to us about the Sustainable Development Goals and your work, which I think now more than ever is so, so important. Who would have thought that civic space is getting smaller and smaller? I think you said 7 out of 10 people in the world live in regimes or authoritarian states where the civic space is very, very difficult to negotiate and navigate. It is a difficult place we're in, but hope is always there. Civicus is a torchbearer of hope, and we thank you for it. And we'd love to have you back on again in a while to update us about your work and what progress you're making with the UN. And we all support you in that, because I think it's extremely important to make the UN more representative of the people that they should be representing. So Mandeep, thank you very much indeed.
It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and thank you for your patience and for your thoughtfulness in having this dialogue.
That's lovely. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This is a time of huge global challenges. The rich are getting richer, and inequality is on the rise. The climate is changing at a dangerous pace. Sustained attacks on human rights are commonplace in many parts of the world. Democracy is in crisis, with extremism and populism tearing our societies apart. Civicus is a global alliance of civil society organizations and activists dedicated to strengthening citizen action and civil society throughout the world. We do this because we believe that people and their organizations working together can tackle these challenges and change the world. We listened to our members and partners from around the globe to shape the Civicus strategic plan. We understand their deep concerns about the challenges facing humanity. They have told us what Civicus can do to support them to drive positive change. Our strategic plan has 3 goals: defending civic freedoms and democratic values, strengthening the power of people to organize, mobilize, and take action, empowering a more accountable, effective, and innovative civil society. We work to achieve these goals by building solidarity among civil society across borders. We support civil society to connect with others, advocate for systemic change, and amplify the voices of those not usually heard. We produce analysis that interprets trends that affect civil society as they happen, promote efforts to resource civil society in sustainable ways, and innovate and incubate bold civil society-led initiatives. We work with a diversity of civil society actors, including activists, social movements, and organizations, especially from the Global South. We also work with and seek to influence governments, international organizations, the media, and the private sector. There are big challenges ahead, but we know our members and partners have some big responses. Our job at Civicus is to connect, amplify, and scale this action. Do you believe that people and their organizations working together can achieve a more just, inclusive, and sustainable world? Become a Civicus member and join us on this journey.